we are going to start before the people is entering the room. I don't know.
And you want to come closer because we feel alone.
I think the people is like going out, and then people didn't start like going in. So we are going to talk about this like universal access to the ClimateTech, right? So I think the first thing that I would like you to do is to introduce like 1-2 minutes about yourself and what you are doing. So then we can get deeply into a conversation. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Carlos.
I'm Carlos. I'm from Splite. We work especially in electricity. We're a B2B solution that especially works with generation and transmission from electrical energy. There is a big issue in renewables that transmission system is becoming the bottleneck of the adoption of renewables, so we are aiming to solve that issue, to get more energy into the grid by letting all this energy that is already there with infrastructure that is already there into the grid to get a better use of this part of the system.
Thomas? Yeah, I'm Thomas, CEO and co-founder of Terra Preta. We are a climate tech company. We are removing CO2 from the atmosphere and improving soil health through enabling the decentralized production of biochar at scale. So what we're doing is we are providing our small-scale reactors and our control system to partners in the coffee and cacao supply chain, so enabling them to produce the biochar directly at their farmer site afterwards. So they go from farm to farm, processing agricultural waste into biochar, and then applying the biochar to the soil in order to improve the soil's health, the productivity, and finally store away carbon for hundreds of years. And from that, we then generate carbon removal credits that we're selling on the voluntary carbon market.
Christoph, go ahead.
I'm Christopher. I'm the co-founder and CEO of SunHero. We are helping customers in Spain to electrify their homes in a climate-positive way, installing PV panels, chargers, batteries, and expanding into other product areas that help customers save money, gain independence from their much-beloved utility providers, and ultimately also do something positive for the planet. We're headquartered in Barcelona, have a pretty big team here in Madrid as well. And our customers are really looking for independence, are looking for savings, and are ultimately curious about how to do that. They don't know where to start. The solutions out there are piecemeal, so we offer kind of a one-stop shop with a very clear focus on ultimately delivering systems, making sure that customers can get their systems up and running in weeks and not months. And that is what we're doing by really focusing on the residential customer and extremely focusing on the processes behind that, using a lot of software and technology to ultimately make that process faster, cheaper, and more seamless for the customer.
Yeah. Nice. And I'm Florian. I'm with Planet A Ventures. We're an early-stage climate tech fund out of Germany. We do invest across pre-seed to Series A stages in great founders like Christopher, who actually build businesses that are impactful and scalable. And we started out 2 years ago really with the proposition of saying, how can we trigger systemic change, and how can we support founders that actually do make a difference and don't greenwash or just incrementally make things better. And we were actually the first European fund to get a science team on board. And what we do is that we quantify the impact of every single investment that we do, really looking very deeply into the technologies and the products of that company, having our science team running so-called life cycle assessments and using that impact data point that we create for ourselves as an important proxy for the impact, but also the financial prospects of the company. Have done 17 or 18 investments so far and really look very broadly across all industries where we have large potential for decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors, but also working on topics such as biodiversity and waste issues.
Well, before getting into deeply talking about the space, I would like you also to talk, you three, what makes you special? What is your competitive advantage that actually makes you different to any other similar solutions that are into the space? We can go now the other way.
The other way around. So I think from our point of view, most people who are kind of thinking about PV panels, especially in a market like Spain, which is massively underdeveloped in that front and has only recently been liberated from a regulatory point of view, people don't really know where to start. So they go on Google and they search, placas solares and wherever they live, and they find some local installer who may not call them back, who's on the road, who is not able to access the latest technologies, who maybe doesn't understand the trends in the market and doesn't see where what the best possible solution for the customer is. And the other option for them is to talk to their utility. But the problem really is that utilities fundamentally have two problems, one of them being that the customers hate them, and the other one being that they also kind of hate their customers because that's not really the business that they're in. And so for us, we very clearly said, this is a consumer decision. This is a high price, 10 to 15,000 euro consumer decision that every consumer is making for the first time. They cannot call their parents, they cannot call their uncles or friends or neighbors because most of them have not made this decision. So the customer is essentially alone. And the customer really needs someone who has this very clear focus on the consumer and not on the solution. So that is where we started. And the other side of the coin for us is really this view that you have to be quite highly vertically integrated. And because at the end of the day, you need to be able to deliver to the consumer. And if you are, then you really have to have a lot of process power. And you can build a lot of competitive differentiation by having process power. I just read one of our public competitors in their latest Q4 report said, we try to keep installations under 6 months. We do installations in 20 days. Mm-hmm. And that is process power. And that is competitive differentiation.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, for us, it's biochar is mostly produced so far in centralized facilities, very high-tech facilities in the global north. And what we are doing different is that we give the accessibility to local conditions in the global south. So our solution is designed very cost efficiently and mobile in order to fit into the local conditions in the global south to produce biochar at scale, also in a decentralized context. So meaning that our solutions go from farm to farm, processing the residues into biochar. So that's kind of the main differentiator that we have.
Well, in our case, we are going after an issue that is really talking about, and it's not something that many startups are going up, that is transmission system. And we provide this kind of solution with a fully cloud platform, doing all the software with no added hardware, so we can deploy this solution with no downtime for the lines, no putting anything there, just getting the infrastructure that is already there. So that's something that not many people are doing or trying to do. So that's like the main difference of what we do.
Yeah. You, Christopher, touched one point that I think might be kind of like the elephant in the room. You said, due to regulatory, now in Spain, it's a good place to be. So the elephant in the room is, and because this is we were talking about mass adoption of the ClimateTech, how actually does this regulatory environment impact, and what can we expect on that?
Well, I think, first of all, within ClimateTech, we have to differentiate quite massively, and I think there's a couple of different camps. In the renewables space, which is where we are ultimately active, we have reached a point where ClimateTech is not a non-profit altruism case, but there's real, very tangible, very simple business cases. So we are getting to the point, and I think this is the fundamental shift that has gone that we've experienced over the last couple of years, is that we're now seeing, the people that are joining us, they're coming from BCG, they're coming from Booking.com, they're coming from Glovo, they're coming from Airbnb. They've seen high growth, high consumer-facing tech companies over the last couple of years. They're not coming from the climate dogmatist world. They're coming from a very practical world, but they want to do something that has impact. Because the production costs on renewables has gone down so far, the next 10 years, we will see a lot more stability. We will see less regulatory intervention. We, I think, have reached, in that sense, also mass consumer adoption on renewables. We see it now with an election in Spain where neither of the two competing parties are going to drastically change the focus on renewables. That was different 10 years ago. And so I think that's the case for renewables. I think in other cases, we have different technologies where the technology is not, both the technology is not quite as mature, so there's more regulatory intervention. And I think there's also more, so both more kind of technology uncertainty and regulatory uncertainty. But that's not my area. My area is a lot more clear-cut for people who want to get into that space, who want to see something grow, to have impact, who don't necessarily come from a science background, but come from a marketing, sales, operational background, and taking those skills and applying them to something that matters. We don't need to go out and find the mission. We don't need to go and find the purpose. Our purpose is our business model.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, guys, regarding to this? I mean, at the end of the day, we as consumers usually see that is really intervention. This the production of energy, the consumption, the transport of the energy, and the consumption is really touched by the government. So how does this really will impact or not in this adoption?
I think that for a lot of time, we didn't think about where the light come off. We just care that the light is there, and the same about where our vegetables are grown, how they are grown. We just want them now, and that is changing. And that's something that is from the consumer side, from the people side, that's amazing. The part that we have to make with here is make this profitable. So it's not like you're saying, something willing to do, but it's a business that everybody's winning. And I think that right now, clean tech, carbon capture, solar renewables are in a place that it can be like that. So big companies are going to be built doing renewables. Big companies are going to be built doing carbon capture, and they're going to be healthy companies with an amazing business model and with a positive impact. And that's the goal that I think everyone shares here. And we are now in a point that technology is allowing that, the prices are allowing that. The only thing that is missing is to do it. And I think that we all are trying to do that. And I was saying before about thinking about things. That's something very important, because most people maybe are not thinking about a lot of that things. Make them think about that, and realizing that they can be done better is something that we have also to do. It's like preaching in a certain way.
Yeah, I think it's really about generating those win-win-win situations for all stakeholders that you involve in your solutions, so that really each of them has an economic profit, but also in the end that the whole model profits the environment. And I think on the action side, I mean, maybe the regulatory environment on our side is a little bit earlier, right? It's also evolving, but some companies will still profit from a little bit more clarity on how the accounting for carbon is really going to turn out and how carbon removal is going to fit into that. So even though there's already a huge movement of companies taking action, as recently JP Morgan with huge purchases in the market, others are still waiting a little bit with their action. But I think there the point is the regulatory side is rather an enabler. It's not that it should be based on the regulatory, but the regulatory should enable the corporates to act in a framework where they have clarity on what they should do or what they could do.
Mm-hmm. Florian?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you said, regulation is super critical, because if you think about the problems we're facing on a higher level, it's really the fact that we're consuming more than we should consume, right? I guess you're all familiar with this Earth Overshoot Day, and I guess we're consuming 1.6 Earths at this point. So that's, I guess, the fundamental climate problem, and that just means that whether we want it or not, regulation plays a big role in solving the climate problems. I guess what that means for entrepreneurs is probably two things. On the one hand, it enables a lot of business cases that otherwise would not get off the ground because technologies are too expensive in the beginning, because there is no markets for high-quality carbon removals, etc. So regulation has to play an important role in enabling those business cases. But for us as investors, it's obviously a very volatile environment, and it's very hard to invest in cases which solely depend on some future regulation to kick in, right? So I guess the ideal scenario is what we see with solar, where there is feed-in tariffs, etc., that kind of got technology cost curves down, and now you're kind of this inflection point where it makes sense to install renewables whether there's regulation or not, and you can slowly phase out subsidies, etc. So in the end, we're obviously not philanthropists, so we want to invest in big companies that also deliver financial returns. But I think we have to accept that regulation, at least initially, plays a role in leveling the playing field and allowing those technologies to develop to a level where they really reduce the green premium and are competitive to more polluting alternatives.
Yeah, you mentioned that probably in the renewables, we don't need anymore those subsidiaries, that we are going to be more stable, like already is a more mature technology that is giving profits, as Carlos had. But the other day I read an article about what is happening in Norway. Okay? What is happening in Norway in the sense that Norway has been subsidizing in order to do like more electric cars, more renewables, etc. And once the electric cars are already in a nice percentage into the market, they are taking out those subsidies and so on. And looks like, I don't know, I didn't go there and see the picture, but they were saying like, okay, maybe we are not yet there, not yet ready, because in the case of the cars, for example, they said like, okay, blue collar people is still going in diesel, and only the white collar, cool, whatever, is going electric. And at the same time, those cars are being charging at night when there is no wind, there is no sun, and they are being charged with the gas that is being burned some kilometers away. So actually, how can we actually have a like really big picture of what is happening, where should we actually be, or we will be ready? Yeah. What is the big problem now?
Look, I think especially in the case of renewables, what we see is renewables and a lot of these technologies, they get installed and they get bought where they have been installed and where they have been bought. I talked to someone who is in, large agricultural biofuels, and even in that case, the people are making this decision once the neighboring farms have made that decision. Even if on paper you do a very straightforward financial analysis and you do the calculation, at the end of the day, the trigger is someone else is moving before you. We saw that with the development of solar in Northern Europe, where we've reached a point where solar is being installed where it's already been installed. We see the same thing in Spain. Most of our customers are coming from the areas where we already have a lot of customers because they see other neighbors who have installed solar panels. Now, I think regulation, as Florian said, has this kind of initial ignition, but doing it is, especially if it's on subsidy level, is extremely tricky. We see that, we saw feed-in tariffs in the UK, 10 years ago, way too high, pulled back way too drastically. It creates a hangover effect. You essentially kill the market for a few years to come. In Germany, feed-in tariffs going down much slower. Still, everyone is always up in arms about it because they don't realize, well, the prices have also come down significantly, so actually the math kind of still works for the consumer. Getting that right is obviously tricky, especially in the consumer world where the decisions are, let's say, at scale rational, but individually can be irrational. But I think Norway is playing an incredibly important part in the EV adoption, even if on paper it doesn't make sense to charge an EV at night with gas. Of course it doesn't, but it's still pushing the world to a new technology. It's pushing companies to invest more in these technologies. And it's pushing, in the charging case, solar PV developers to invest into grid-scale storage, kind of enabling charging at night, even with renewable energy and not with fossil fuel energy.
Yeah, maybe to your point of where should we head, I think there's no silver bullet, right? It's not like we're going to adopt solution X, Y, and Z and then we have all problems solved. That's a bit delusional, I think. There's going to be a large portfolio of solutions that we will need, and there's going to be certain transition technologies that will get us there. But a lot has to happen to really, get to a more sustainable future on a systemic level and on so many different ways. But saying that we shouldn't invest in EVs now because in the short term there might be some downsides to it will just create certain even more lock-ins to stay with fossil fuels. So I think we have to accept that we will not find perfect solutions, but we incrementally can iterate and get to better solutions to eventually have a fully decarbonized grid.
And I think that this goes to a point that we were talking before about two things. You have to think something that is useful now and is going to get better in the future, and you have to think something that is useful locally and it can be expanded worldwide. So you understand better where you are and you understand better today than tomorrow. But if that is working today, probably is as bad as it's going to get. The future is always going to be better technology, better solar panels that can, I was reading the other day a paper about a solar technology that can use the light in the moon to generate like a baseline of energy. So the technology is growing, is getting better, and we see it. Solar panels, wind, carbon captures 10 years ago, 15 years ago were a pipe dream. Now it's a reality that if you're not already putting money in that, you are way behind. So that kind of small evolutions, the small stepping stones that we're taking, are what are going to reach us to that future that we want. So yeah, maybe we are not charging our EVs with renewables today, but that's going to change not in 10 years, but in 7 days or in 1 month, and that times are going faster because we are building technology and that can help with that. So we get ideas from the consumer side, from the ground up, from the regulatory side, from the big corporations that also are seeing this, like not only greenwashing, but also a market. Somewhere that they can make money and they want to do it. And if they do it well, like we are going to try to then to do it with the startups, with new technology, that's the way to go.
And I think one point you mentioned before about Norway, which was also quite interesting, you said different income levels have different purchasing power. We can actually protect it on the whole globe, right? I mean, different technologies and different purchase powers demand for different kind of technologies, right? We cannot go with high-tech solutions to the global south. We need to understand the local context we're in. And actually, very often global south is getting forgotten, as we discussed before, right? I mean, when we look at the footprint of the world and of what's going to come also due to population growth in the global south, we should also see that we can bring ClimateTech to the global south, because that's gonna make a hell of a lot of a difference in the future. And there it's about understanding the local conditions and bringing solutions that are not over-engineered, that are cost efficient, that function in the local context where maybe the energy grid is not everywhere, right? So hardware solutions which don't depend on plugging it in somewhere, right? Those are the tiny things, but they in the end really matter in those contexts.
Yeah, you just put on the table like really interesting issue, because it's kind of like those emerging markets are actually the ones with the most populations, the ones that actually are increasing the most the energy consumption in the last years and probably in the years to come. So it's really interesting to try to address the solution through that low purchasing power that actually is those markets addressing. So what is the bottleneck in here? Because, I mean, in production looks like technology is going there. There are many different ways on production, renewables and some of the other different ways of production. But looks like there is some problem in storage right now, because it's kind of like, yeah, you can produce, but you cannot storage and put into the grid whenever you need it. Or even if you are in an isolated grid in the south that you are not connected, then how can you storage and use it later, right? So maybe is that the problem, or?
I think at the end of the day, if you zoom out all the way, it's, you know, what you said earlier, like we're consuming more than we should, and that consumption comes with a lot of, you know, emissions and production, and it doesn't happen in, you know, a single server in Helsinki that we, you know, put some software into. And, you know, there are some interesting, super exciting software solutions, but at the end of the day, carbon needs to be captured and stored, and energy needs to be produced in a clean manner, and that requires hardware. And that hardware needs to be built, and it needs to be deployed, it needs to be sold and maintained and financed, and ultimately, that's all possible. And the business cases to do that are also there, but it's not something that has an adoption curve like TikTok or, you know, some other piece of software that you just have on your mobile phone. And so ultimately what we need is more smart people who believe in this, more smart investors who can convince their LPs of investing into this. And
He just called us smart.
yeah, I said more smart investors. No, but I think you guys are starting, like we see more and more investors who are believing this. And I mean, I love what Planet A is doing, obviously, like with a singular focus. But I love easily as much what you guys are doing, who don't come from that background. And I see that with our other investors who are not pure climate investors, but who are starting to really believe in what's possible here. And I see more and more young people coming into this market who want to do something amazing. And I think that's what we need.
Okay. I think that you say the key word, that is adoption. Adoption and accessibility with that. That's are like the two things that we need the most, because a lot of the technology that we need, not only to reach net zero, but to be net positive, to get more carbon out of the atmosphere that is already there, you don't have to develop it. Are already there, and we know it. The thing is, we have to get them cheaper and easier to deploy everywhere. So that's like the main challenge that you have to be able to tackle. And to make the compelling case that you are doing that and you're making a business is the best way to get it as fast as possible everywhere, because even if your company totally fails, and you are going to be a model for people that are going to do something better than you, and that they are going to reach that point. So making that the business can work doing this is something that is important in a very particular way.
Yeah, and I think that kind of like speaks to the topic of the panel, right? How can you really ensure universal adoption of climate tech? And I think it really comes down to expanding it beyond a core of very intrinsically motivated or altruistic people who do it for the sake of it, to really getting investors in who are financially driven, getting founders in who are doing it for the business cases, and delivering those business cases that actually add value to customers. I think if we get there and we actually mainstream climate tech, I think that should be the overall goal of all of us, and making people excited about the opportunities there. Frankly, I think whether it's the global south or the global north, I think there's so many problems to be solved that we can't wait to see more investors and founders entering into the space. I think, as Christopher said, the most exciting thing is actually the wave of talent and incredibly experienced people that are going into climate tech now, which is probably unprecedented, and which makes at least us very, very excited about the future, because I don't think we have that much of a talent push in any other sector at the moment, which really gives us a lot of hope, and also great for us from an investment perspective.
So just to end, because we have just a few minutes to end, what can we ask to the people in the room, entrepreneurs, consumers, in order to impact in climate? What can we ask to the consumers, the entrepreneurs in the room? I mean, what you would like,
Get
you
solar
would say
panels
like,
installed.
put some hero in your home, right? But so go ahead.
This is not
it's
a
your
response for
time.
Install some solar panels and go to sanhero.com/careers. I think those are the two things that I would ask of this room. I think I was thinking about Thomas's solution earlier. Like, at the margin, if you make a decision that is a little bit more forward-looking, and you take a risk if you can financially, I think those people who can take some financial risks, they should push for the solution that is a little bit more cutting edge. It's the Norwegians who bought EVs, even if it's governmentally subsidized. I think that's ultimately at the margin what makes the difference.
So at the end, is something that you said at the beginning is kind of like, okay, some people is not adopting these solutions just because other people is not adopting. So just, okay, take your risk, analyze the options, and jump, because actually at the end, in mid-long term, is financially good for you, and it's going to be even better for the planet.
That was your point, right?
Yeah.
It just gets better.
Be brave, go green.
Yeah, and I also think it has to do with the point that you said before, on the investor side, right? To deploy also into hardware more money is, I think that's something I would ask here, that you also a little bit mentioned, right? I think that's a big point, because in the end, it's going to take hardware to reduce a large part of our emissions, and it's going to take hardware to remove the emissions from the atmosphere that we already put out too much. Those are hardware solutions. And there we need those brave companies, those that have maybe a little bit more financial capacity to go and take the risk. But in the end, probably everything is going to go into that direction. First of all, technological improvement so that it becomes better, more efficient, more profitable. And the other part is the regulatory, which is also going that way, right? And if you're moving ahead of the curve, now corporate side talking, not the investor side talking, is if as a corporate you move ahead of that curve, you can help shape it. You can help shape it together with the government on how those regulatory are going to look like. You can help shape which solutions are going to win in the end. So that's maybe corporate investor side, both a little bit mixed.
So entrepreneurs here in the room, just jump and make solutions in ClimateTech. You are not going only to start your business and make a life out of it, but you are going to save the planet. So that's one thing. And the second thing, as consumer, like take that risk and jump and do something that is going to be good for you and good for all the others. So I think we already finished. So.
Well, we actually have a few minutes in hand because the stage has been running bang on time all day. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to put to the panel? Yes, the gentleman over here.
We are not talking that much regarding the consumer footprint and how important is our decisions as consumer in the global footprint. So I think as consumer, we are waiting for companies and government to make actions, but I'm not feeling that there are so much into that. What do you think?
I think it's this interesting solution where everyone is pointing their fingers at the other ones, and the politicians say, well, it's our voters, and the voters say, hey, there's no regulation coming. I think the solution to the problem really is everyone has to do something, right? But if you look at the European Union on what kind of regulation is being passed there, I think they're very, very progressive about enabling a lot of those use cases. But in the end, it comes down to individual consumers and daily choices, right? There is no way around changing those individual choices. I think, consumers have the power to force corporates to become more sustainable through their purchasing decisions, but obviously companies have a very strong incentive from a competitive advantage perspective to anticipate that, as Thomas said, and move ahead of the curve and develop sustainable options. So I think there's not an easy solution of saying a single of those stakeholder groups is responsible or should act. I think everyone has to do something.
Yeah, but I mean, coming to your point, every consumer that is going to buy anything is doing actually, a selection between impact or not to impact. I mean, every time that you buy something, if it's coming from the other side of the world, even if it's a little bit cheaper than the one that is just a few miles away from your home, and it's a little bit more expensive, but then you are buying it and you are doing the choice. I mean, just save few bucks, or make also an impact with those few euros in difference. But it's something difficult because we see every time that retailers that are going like competitive advantage in price, for example, in fashion, you see that sometimes are the ones that actually get selling the most. So that demonstrates that our conscience is not yet there. And we have to do also something from our side as a consumer.
I think that in our side, here, we have to make these things more accessible and cheaper so the consumers want it. And the consumer have to think about these things. I always go back to this point because I really believe that right now there are amazing solutions that they don't have enough press, to say in either way. And I believe that if one consumer buy one panel, that is going to make a chain reaction that can be very benefit. And you are not losing money. You are doing something that is getting you money in the end. So there is of course, government have to do more, entrepreneurs, we have to do more, and consumers have to do more because everybody is involved in this. We're all together.
May I? Hello.
Hello.
ClimateTech-wise, we listen a lot talking about energetic transition, but we don't listen a lot talking about protein transition. Energetic transition implies a lot of investment. Protein transition, you would make it just by reducing your meat intake a few times a week. Why don't you talk about this? Is it because the investments related are not that important?
I didn't actually get the
Can you repeat the
most
question?
important word that it was, the whatever.
Protein.
The thing is,
Protein.
Protein.
That we
transition.
switched to
Yeah,
the
okay.
thing-
Oh, yeah.
protein.
We
Yeah.
could make this really short, guys, because we are beginning to run out of time. So a little tiny answer.
I believe, if I can...
I
take that-
don't really know why people is not talking so much about that. I mean, I have a friend that he started a ONG in the US regarding the protein transition and has started to explain me also how we should, everyone in the globe, change from animal protein to vegetable protein and so on. I don't know, maybe it's kind of like every revolution, it gets a point of start, claims some attention, then goes down, and then actually gets more adoption later on, right? If we think about renewables, I think in the 70s already it was an issue, but it's only now that it's starting to have an adoption. So I think in protein transition probably something that is going to come, but it's going to come a little bit later. Like you need to get in there.
So ladies and gentlemen, don't forget that you can always continue the conversation on the app by contacting our speakers if you have anything else that you'd like to add to them. Please give a big round of applause to our panel.
Thank you very
Carlos Calder, Thomas Caslin, Christopher Kader-Scott, Florian Schab, and our moderator, Enrique Penashegar.